Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are so happy to have you with us this afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. It is slightly interactive. You'll be hearing David present, but you will also have the chance to send questions and comments in the chat. So feel free to orient yourself to your Zoom screen. You can use the chat function. And you can also use the Q&A function at the bottom. David will be taking some questions if there's time at the end. But yeah, I'm happy to have you here. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us a little bit about you, your name, your affiliated organization or your labor union, if you have one. And maybe as an icebreaker question, if you want to let us know what do you love most about movement photography or social justice photography in general, we would love to hear it. So we will give folks about a minute to log on and join us and introduce yourselves at the same time. Like I said, later portions of this workshop will be interactive, so feel free to send questions and comments at any time that you'd like. If you would like to answer one of David's questions verbally or out loud, you can always raise your hand. There should be a button at the bottom of your screen that allows you to raise your hand. Or for some folks, if you do it visually, just physically, that'll trigger your Zoom to give us a notification. And then those of us on the tech side, we will give you the mic. We'll give you unmuting permission. So you can write your answers or you can say your answers. And I believe that's all the logistics. So as folks are sending in your introductions, we love to see it. Thank you so much. I will just get us started. So we are very lucky today to host David Bacon and learn from his years of expertise and experience as an organizer, as a movement photographer, and as an artist. So today's event, as well as the following two workshops that we have, one next Thursday and then one the Thursday afterward, which will be in person at the UCLA Labor Center in MacArthur Park, are all thanks to our wonderful, wonderful project director, Yana Shadak Hernandez, who convened us, who brought us together, who connected David with our team. And so she is a wonderful advocate for the UCLA Labor Center, for our UCLA Labor Studies program, and also just for our center's ongoing commitment to the visual arts and to communications. So today and over the next few weeks, we are very excited to bring together communicators, organizers, artists, photographers, workers, everyone who is interested in building that narrative arc of storytelling that advances our shared movements for social justice. So with that, I would love to hand the mic to you, David, and take us away.
Great. Well, just glancing at this chat here, which seems now full of people's introductions, I see a lot of friends and a lot of folks that we're meeting for the first time. So thank you so much for being part of this. And so I'm going to start sharing the screen here. And here we go. And this is going to be kind of divided into two parts here. The first part of it, we're going to take a look at some revolutionary photographs and talk about them, mostly ones from the past. And then we'll have a little chance for some Q&A. And then the second part of it, I'm going to show some of my own work as a labor strike photographer, really. And we can talk about those. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a special guest at the end of it who could show us a little bit about her work as well, too. So with all of that, let's just get started. Also, I would like to be able to make this as interactive as we can, given to be honest, I've never done it quite like this before, so I'm a little nervous about it. But as much as we can make this interactive, I think that would be great. And so I'm going to start out by asking a question, and if you want to answer it, then just let our administrators know, and they will put you on the air, so to speak. So the first one is this, and first of all, what is this? What are we looking at? Anybody want to give us a little introduction to this image here on the screen? Anybody have anything about it? Do we know who this is? Do we know why we're looking at it? Why it's famous? Anybody want to raise their hand and just jump in on it? Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead with it, and but if you have some thoughts about it, please, let me know or let us know. So obviously, this is one of the world's most famous images, and it's a revolutionary image because it is an image of a revolutionary. This is Che Guevara. And it even has a name that's not his, that they gave it in Cuba to call this image, and it's called El Guerrillero Heroico, the heroic guerrillero, or the heroic guerrilla fighter. And this was an image that's been intended to inspire people and inspire revolutionary struggle all over the world, and it's been this since the um, early 1960s. So it was originally a photograph, though, and this is the photograph that it was taken from by Corda, a famous Cuban photographer. And but when if we want to see the actual complete photograph here, this is the actual photograph that it was taken from. And so, we can kind of ask ourselves when Corda took this photograph, did he think or realize what was going to happen to it? That it would be transformed into this very dramatic image and that it would travel the world and wind up in the um, visual vocabulary of people and take its place in history, really. And I think the obvious answer is probably not. So photographs, they can kind of um, take on a life of their own. And this one certainly did. But why it took on that life and what happened to it has to do with the context of it in a way as much as it did when it was taken. It was taken during the Cuban Revolution for sure. So that in itself makes it kind of a revolutionary photograph. But then the way it was used after that certainly makes it one, kind of an icon, really. So, the circumstances under which it was taken was, he was taking portrait photographs of Che um, in a way that, well, I'll show you another one from somebody else. But here's a photograph of actual guerrilleros involved in struggle. And this was taken by Rodrigo Moya, who was also a revolutionary photographer, a Mexican communist photographer who took it in the early 1950s in Venezuela. And this was an early guerrillero struggle against what was kind of a proto-fascist um, Venezuelan government at the time. And this is also a revolutionary photograph because of its content. It's showing revolutionary people doing revolutionary things. And this also has the intention of kind of inspiring that kind of activity, but in a very different way. This is much more of like, I guess you would say a documentary, a social documentary photograph. And in a way, what he did here, what Moya did was he kind of set a pattern for the way we were going to see guerrilla struggle from that point onwards, so that the photographers, for instance, who went to Central America in the 1970s and 1980s, Antonio Turok, and others, had this photograph in mind. This was kind of the iconic photograph that they had in mind when they were taking their own photographs of the same kind of armed struggle.
David,
And
you have a
therefore,
question from
sure.
Christopher Turley, or a hand raised rather. Christopher, if you want to come off mute.
Sorry, wrong. Sorry, I hit the button accidentally.
No
Okay,
worries, no worries. Well, to everyone else, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand like Christopher did. Sorry, go
sure.
ahead, David.
And so this is Moya's photograph of Che, and he took it to show Che much more as a human being than as a revolutionary icon. And this is, Moya was a photojournalist and also interested in documenting what was happening in terms of people's struggles in Mexico at the time. And this is a photograph of PRI goons basically beating up a railroad striker during the railroad strike in 1958 in Mexico City. And so he was interested in looking at the social struggles of his day as well. Photographs can become and symbols to inspire action. So if you know your longshore history, you know that this was a photograph that inspired the 1934 general strike that shut down the waterfront up and down the West Coast. And this is a photograph of the shape up. In a way, it always reminds me of photographs of day laborers too, because it's the same thing as workers asking for work from the person who has it, the foreman in the window there. And it was such a humiliating experience that workers went on strike to, among other things, abolish the system and set up the Union Hiring Hall, which they won in the strike ever afterwards. But this was the photograph by Otto Hegel and Hansel Meath, who were German refugees and photographers in the 1930s to inspire that. This is another photograph that they took. They actually, when they got here in the 30s, they worked as farm workers in the cotton. And this is the weighmaster in the cotton, again, somebody who had the power of life and death over workers. And so, in that sense, a revolutionary photograph. And this is their photograph of a workers' meeting out in the countryside. You know, you can see the clandestine aspect of it, right? Being lit by the headlights of a car, somebody on the right there speaking to the assembled people. Why are they doing this out there in the dark in the car? It's because they could not meet openly themselves. And this sort of shows the sort of clandestine nature of farm worker organizing, not only in that period. I think actually this was taken after World War II, but you could even say, you could even almost visualize it being taken now. So one of the things that revolutionary photography does is it uses juxtaposition. And this is Tina Modotti, who was an Italian immigrant, grew up in San Francisco, went to Mexico City and became a revolutionary in Mexico City and a photographer. And so this was one of her first contributions in the 1920s to revolutionary photography. And so if somebody wants to translate this and raise their hand, go right ahead. Otherwise, I will simply say, you know, what it says is from the head to the foot, we have everything that is required for a gentleman to dress elegantly. And then down below, we have what? Somebody who has no money to do this. This is the rich and the poor, right? And this is Dorothea Lange, the famous photographer of the 30s here in this country. And this is sort of a humorous one, but it has the same message. Next time, try the train, right? If you have the money for a ticket. So again, this juxtaposition. This was Margaret Bourke-White, another radical photographer of the 30s, with a line especially of African-American unemployed people, and up against this billboard of happy white people in their car. There's no way like the American way. And you could almost say, yes, that's for sure. This is the American way. This is the American way of the Depression. And it was certainly the American way today, world's highest standard of living. Yeah, but for who? Right? So the photograph, it makes you ask all of these questions. That's what makes it a revolutionary image. I've tried to do the same kind of thing in my way. This is of children of strawberry workers in Santa Maria marching, trying to get the wages of strawberry workers up. And here the growers are having their strawberry festival at the fairgrounds. Let the magic begin of the strawberry festival. And you would say, well, magic for who? And another one, this is an indigenous woman, mother of strawberry workers, outside the fence where the rides and the nice things of the strawberry festival are all taking place. And the fence itself tells you about exclusion. This is a photograph about exclusion. So juxtaposition, it can carry a message in a very kind of simple way. And Lange and Modotti were both very, very good at this. So this is a Dorothea Lange image from the 30s taken in, well, okay, the license plate tells us where it was, right? Mississippi. And so what are we looking at here? This is the landowner, the white plantation owner, and behind him are the workers. And so the way he has his foot on the bumper of the car and the workers behind him tells you who's boss. This is about class. This is about class relationships. And you can see it just so directly in this image. So in a way, this is juxtaposition of rich and poor, powerful and not powerful, just by looking at who the people are and how they're arranged. This is Tina Madadi doing the same thing in Mexico, the cacique, or in other words, the boss of the hacienda. And so there he is, in his power, sitting in this chair and surrounded by his acolytes. And then at the edges of the photograph are these two people who are probably not his relatives, the people who are not powerful, who are being excluded. And so this again is that same rich and poor. So then revolutionary photography doesn't just pose the problem. It also asks, well, okay, then what? What is the solution here? And here is an image that has some solution to it. So, oh, well, no, this is a civil rights image. This is by the great civil rights photographer, Matt Herron, who just died recently. And this again is the image of power and powerless. If you can read the little teeny sign there, it says lawn of the month, right? The lawn of the month of this wealthy, plantation home with its pillars and its lawn, and then an African American worker doing the gardening down underneath. And even what's up in this picture and what's down in this picture tells you about the class relations. The worker isn't on top and the house on the bottom. It's the other way around. And so even the physical placement of the people in this picture or the person in the house tells you about the class relations here. But then again, okay, this is a very, very famous photograph. And so I really do want to ask if there's anybody here who recognizes this photograph and who can interpret it for us. So does anybody want to give this one a shot? If you do, raise your hand thing and let us hear your voice. So I'm going to count to 5.
We have a comment in the chat from Christopher saying, is that Zapata? And then Leslie says, Sanborns in Mexico City.
Okay, yes. And what about Sanborns in Mexico City? That's definitely, you're right, absolutely about that. And so who is in the picture and what is going on here? So, okay, Sanborns is a restaurant in downtown Mexico City, even in this time, and this must have been taken maybe what, 1915, sometime like that. And it was a restaurant for people with money. And so the wait staff, the two women who are waiting tables in this restaurant, are dressed in this formal uniform that people in this wealthy restaurant, had to put on in order to wait on their economic betters. And here they are waiting not on rich people, but on the revolutionaries themselves, the members of the Ejército del Sur, Zapata's army of the South. And they have taken Mexico City, and they are now the people who are on top. And the people who used to go to this restaurant are not even in the picture at all. And so, here you have the guys with the guns at the counter, and then on the other side you can see, the campesinos in their sombreros and the bandolieros and the people waiting on them. And it's not a humiliating thing necessarily about the people who are doing the table service here. It's really just talking about that the revolution has turned everything upside down, and that the people who were on the bottom are now the people who are on the top, and that's the revolutionary answer to the inequality that we've been looking at. So, talking about images that were produced in revolutions by revolutionary struggle. This is Tina Madadi, and Tina Madadi in the 1920s, after she got to Mexico City and learned photography from Edward Weston, joined the Mexican Communist Party and became a revolutionary. And she took this photograph as part of what she considered her revolutionary work. And so what we're looking at, first of all, is El Machete. El Machete was the newspaper of the Mexican Communist Party in the 1920s. And so here we have some people in their sombreros looking at El Machete. So first of all, the message you get from this is that this is a newspaper that is being read with interest by workers or by peasants, one or the other. And but it is also a newspaper that is speaking to them. Toda la tierra, not just little pieces of land. We want all of the land. So this is making the demand. But it's also people becoming literate, people become able to read and discuss the revolutionary demands of their time. And so this photograph is showing this process of the empowerment, I guess you would say, of the Mexican working class and through being able to read. And that's a very important thing because every revolutionary struggle that's going on, one of the first things that it does is it has to enable people to read so that they can participate. So here's Cuba. This must be 1959, because what are we looking at here? These are the young people who are going to go up to the mountains in Cuba and they are going to teach people to read. And so what are they carrying? They're not carrying the guns of the revolution anymore. They are carrying the books that are going to give people power by basically teaching everybody to read so that they can participate and win power in this revolutionary struggle. And even the photograph, it shows them marching as though they were an army. It shows them marching as though they were holding the guns. So this is a really very explicit photograph trying to talk about power and how people get it. This is from Vietnam during the war. These are people learning to read at the same time as they are carrying out their war. And this is from Moscow in the 1920s. And this is Alexander Rodchenko, a very famous Soviet photographer who is basically taking a picture of his mother, actually learning to read and her, looking. So,
David, this is Yana. Hi. I'm just going to say that we've had some comments, some really great comments here also in the chat. And I know you're not watching them, but because you're presenting, I'll just share that folks are saying that these are, really powerful. We had great, like the invasion of the space of the rich from Leslie Gill around the Sanborns picture. That was really an amazing comment. And just sort of this, we're getting more comments about literacy and the power of literacy, and that the oppressor, of course, is often using the mind of the oppressed as their most important and valuable tool, right? So literacy has been continuously used as a tool to oppress. Yeah, the lack of being able to read or have literacy. So thank you for being here, David. I just thought I'd pop in and share that.
well, those are really wonderful comments. And, it's so if illiteracy is the tool of oppression, then literacy is the tool of liberation. And so those are all photographs of people liberating themselves by learning to read as the way into the political process and political power. So this is another one from the same period. This is Tina Madadi. And if we have time, we can talk a little bit about who she was, because one of the remarkable things about Tina Madadi is after becoming this brilliant photographer and influencing the world of photography for the next century, really, by what she did, she then decided that politics and revolution was more important than photography. And she was deported from Mexico. She went to the Soviet Union. She worked for the Comintern, went to Spain, fought in the Civil War, helped to get refugees out of Spain when Franco won the Civil War, and kind of left photography behind as a deliberate choice. And I think that we're told that photographers, we must place our art on this pedestal, so it's more important than anything. And I think Tina Madadi would have said, well, it's not more important than revolution, that's for sure. So here is a picture of her kind of, again, putting this idea into action. And of course, who we have here are some of the famous lights of the period, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. And they are marching in front of the banner of the Union Sindicato de Pintores y Escultores, the Union of Painters and Sculptors. And, kind of this is a sort of a saying in microcosm, the the politics of the time. In other words, that Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo were saying, yes, we are painters. And because we are painters, we are workers. We are not something above or outside of the social struggle of our time, and we are not something outside of the working class of Mexico. We are part of it. And so we have a union like everybody else, which is the Union of Painters and Sculptors. So this is their identification. They are self-identifying on a class basis with the Mexican Revolution. And this is the picture that encapsulates that.
We have a
Um,
comment from Peter in the chat that's really great. Peter says that this theme of literacy has me thinking about the decline in readership today and the ubiquity of screens, videos, etc. I'm wondering what an image like that might look like, sort of a modern day version of the images that we are seeing here.
That's a really great question. Well, I think that maybe what we could ask is for those people who are going to be here next week or the week after, find a photograph that you think does that today, or maybe you've even taken one. But I think that that's true. We need to find something in our own struggle here that has the same message and that carries that same importance. Not all revolutionary photographs are, as we saw with Che, for instance, Che, the photograph of Che that became the symbol, was eventually not really even treated as a photograph anymore. And Tina Madani, at a certain point, was also taking photographs that were not intended to be, social, how do you want to put it, documentary photography of documenting things. What she was trying to do is to produce symbols in her photography that would inspire revolutionary ideas. And so she took, remember, we're talking about 1925 or 1926. So this is, less than 10 years after the revolution in Russia. And so here she's taken the symbols of the Soviet Revolution, the hammer and the sickle, and put them on top of a sombrero as a way of saying, yes, it's Mexican too. It's not just them, it's us. We are fighting for the same thing. But then what she does is she takes and says, well, okay, let's find the revolutionary symbols of our own, and includes the guitar, the song, the corn, struggle of the Zapatistas, of the people on the land, and then the bullets. This is a gun struggle. This is the struggle of the gun. So again, what she's trying to do is produce a photograph that has this kind of symbolic value to it and that power. So again, we have to think about not just showing the problem, but showing the solution. So this is Miriam Palfi, who was a photographer in the 40s and 50s in this country. And this is again a photograph that I think is really important because of the way it very skillfully uses juxtaposition here. Because obviously what we're looking at are a group of African American children, and they're playing. You see the broken toy even on the sidewalk there, and obviously kids without a lot of money from poor families, and then what's around them, the rundown fence, the street, and so forth, and then behind them is what? Is the Capitol dome, right? So this is the contrast of power and powerless, or money and no money, or who is responsible? This question is sort of asking us, okay, for the life of these young girls in the street here, who has the power to change it, or who had the power and didn't change it? So again, it's a photograph that sets the question. And then here's another photograph that she took at the same time that sets the same question. This is the back of the bus. This is what Rosa Parks would not sit down in. And again, this is partly a documentary photograph, but it's also one that is designed to kind of like be like a little lightning rod. And here is her answer. And so this is, her saying, that people can stand up against it. stand up against the Klan, certainly. And what's also interesting about this one is that this is an anti-Klan demonstration in the 1940s, Negro and white together. And who are the people in this crowd here? They're all mostly white. So it's like saying that the fight against racism and the fight against what we saw in the previous two photographs is not just a fight of black people, it's a fight of all people, it's a fight of white people as well too. And even the sign on the car says that. And then finally, we have some ones that speak to, I thought this was really important given what we're living through here, is the fascist danger as they saw it in that period of time. And this was a photograph by, I think, Hegel and Meath or Dorothy Lai, I've forgotten which one. And this is San Francisco City Hall giving a welcome to a delegation from Germany, from the Nazis. And I think it's the Italian flag that's in the middle there. So this is fascism, American style. You know, this is the American welcome to the fascist threat. So somebody is making a warning here with this photograph saying, hey, wake up. And the same thing here. You know, this is John Gutman. And here it is, you know, as American as apple pie, as they say, right? The flag and George Washington and the Nazi symbol all in the same one and the Sieg Heil salute. So this is the warning. This is the warning. And these photographs, you know, are kind of an part of the anti-fascist struggle, which was part of revolutionary struggle of its time. And context, though, is everything here. So we have to understand when these photographs were taken and where they were taken. So if we look at this one and it says boycott Japanese, buy American, well, okay, think about this for a second here, because on the one hand, this was at the time when the Japanese government was a fascist government. And so there was part of the anti-fascist struggle that was a struggle against that government as well too. But then when it adds down below, buy American, it adds a nationalist thing to it that has some very, very serious consequences for people. So again, you know, without the context of knowing what year was this taken and under what circumstances. And then
Hi, David. Just wanted to jump in. We're about at the 35-minute mark, and we had a really good idea from Eric in the comments. Would be amazing to get a summary with names of photographers afterwards. So many excellent artists to keep researching.
okay. So we're at we have a little bit of time here, I think, before we can kind of get to some Q&A and discussion, if that's okay with people and you. So
That's perfect. That's perfect. And I think the request was that these are wonderful photos, and we can put together a summary together with you, David, of just the photographers and some of the, so folks can continue to do their own research about some of these amazing photographers.
yes, we'll do our best to make that available to people. Yeah, I should have, you know, I didn't caption these things, and I should have tried to caption them with at least the name of the photographer. So I apologize for not having been together enough to do that. So here is again another one that was sort of like the last one. And again, this is a warning photograph. Because what this is this is Gutman again, and this is in San Francisco, and warning about the consequences of the hysteria against Japanese people here in the US. And so this is a Japanese-owned store, who tried to defend themselves by putting I am an American in the window, and then up above it, sold. Sold why? Well, we'll see why here. That's why. Because people were rounded up to be forced into concentration camps. I don't want to call them internment camps because that's not what they were. They were concentration camps, US concentration camps. And so these is a family at the Tamfran Center. This is Dorothy Lang, who just took a portrait shot of them. And again, I think what she was trying to do, she was trying to show that these were real people, that the hysteria was being directed against people who were unable to defend themselves, and also completely undeserving of what was happening to them. And then finally, we have here the photograph. This is a photograph by Hansel Meithen and Otto Hegel of the camp itself. And, again, there's reading this photograph, this is not a happy photograph. Clearly, you can see the barracks going off into the distance. It's cold, it's snowing, and people are gathered around the flag to show their loyalty, right? And you even have the band, the camp band that's going to be there and is going to play, and the management of the camp, making speeches about it. In other words, forcing people to go through this this way of sort of like saying that people were accepting of what was happening to them. And this is a long discussion about what actually happened. And I had a photograph of Carl Leonida that I wanted to show, but it's not here. In any case, the last three that I want to show that are part of this discussion here, I think are ones that sort of look at what else was happening and what other kinds of revolutionary changes were happening, especially in the 1940s. And so this is a series of 3 photographs about sex roles and male supremacy and women. And so these are the women who were working in the shipyard in Richmond, building the ships for World War II. And again, this is a portrait shot, but under the circumstances, I think that it was a very much part of a socially motivating shot. In other words, the reason why she's taking this photograph is to honor the women who are doing this work and show who they are, and especially, again, black and white. And here's a man, and the man is at the back of the line here, right? So he's not the powerful man who's in charge of everything. If anything, it's the woman holding her welding mask. So this is, again, talking about things being turned on their head by the demands of the war and women going into the workforce. And this is another one, which I think is a very skillful photograph of the time. Not a happy photograph at all. And so again, context is everything. And in a sense, I think we have to read into this what we can see in it. So I'm just going to tell you what I see in it. And if you have your own ideas, the more power to you. But first of all, down below you see Richmond, which is where the shipyard was, and TRA, which is trailer park, I think, and you see some trailers there. And so this is a man and a woman in front of the trailer park, meaning they are at home. And yet they're not hugging each other, they're not smiling. In fact, if anything, I almost seem like they're arguing and fighting. And here's the man with 691 on his cap. Looks to me like a union button, local 691 maybe, or something related to work anyway. And here is the woman that he's in this relationship with, and she's also dressed in a very kind of formal way. In other words, this is business, going to work clothes, not, nobody's sort of going out on a day here or anything. And they're arguing with each other, and about what? And I think given the tenor of the times, they're arguing about, he's saying, I want you to stay home and I want dinner to be hot on the table when I get there. And she's saying, that's not my job anymore. I'm working just the way you are. And if you want your dinner hot, go cook it. So again, this is the reversal of sex roles in this picture. Not the reversal, but the struggle for women to have an equal place with men here, and the war, and using the war and what was happening in the war as a way of making that happen. And here's the last one. And this was a photograph that Goodman took, and he couldn't get published until the 1970s. And this is because what he's showing is women loving each other. And this was a revolutionary photograph at the time that he took it, because it was a forbidden subject. And so he was trying to take it and make something, show the beauty and the fact just simply that it exists. So again, not all revolutionary photographs are about people holding books in the air or fighting with guns, but it's also about the social relationships we have with each other. So all of that being said here, I came up with some questions, and I thought that maybe we might want to talk about them because I don't know if anybody was provoked. Certainly, that my intention when I talked about having this series called about photographs for the revolution or revolutionary photography, I kind of deliberately decided not to say social justice photographs. That there was something perhaps that's beyond social justice photographs or social documentary photographs. So I sort of thought, well, okay, let's talk about photographs that took place and that have a place in struggle that goes beyond just the struggles, the day-to-day ones that we have for social justice, that we could call them revolutionary. So what is it that might be revolutionary about a photograph? And here I have some criteria here. And I can read it, which I'll do it, but I think that it would be really interesting and good if we had some folks who wanted to participate on this and see if you agree, or if you have your other criteria for it, or if you think the whole idea of revolutionary photography is not one that you think is a legitimate category. So first of all, obviously photographs can be revolutionary because they change the way in which we see photographs, the way that they're taken, whether it's the guerrilleros with their guns in the mist, or whether it's the two women embracing each other at the end. These photographs, they change the way that we see images, and they kind of change what the criteria is.
I have a comment from Marco who says, if a
Okay.
photo centers people or stories, etc., that are usually excluded from mainstream culture or capitalism, etc.
Okay, that's a good one. Yes, making the invisible visible, or bringing the excluded into the realm of the lens. But for what purpose? I think that's what my question would be to you is, okay, why are we doing this? Because I think revolutionary photographs also have something to do with power. That once people are seen, and once people see themselves as being legitimate participants in social movements or in social struggle, that part of what we're after here is we are after power. What makes photographs revolutionary is that they are about the imbalance of power, who's on top and who's on the bottom. And they are also photographs that have the goal of changing that. Remember, the photograph of Sanborns in Mexico City. What we want is we want to be able to sit at that counter. We want to get the people out of the way who are sitting there, and we want to sit there. But of course, what you're saying in terms of people who are made invisible by our society, the question is, who are we? And that's a very important one as well, too. So we need photographs that show us as who we are. And then what you're saying by implication also is that something bigger, a social movement. But I think also that we are surrounded by photographs in the mainstream media that do, to a certain extent, show, well, for instance, poor people being poor. What are we supposed to do? Supposed to feel sorry for people. Once in a while, photographs of social movements get into the mainstream as well, too, but not often. Think about May Day, right? We just have, what, 3,000 demonstrations all across the country. You would have thought that it would have filled up every page in every newspaper. And yet, what did we see? Very little. So that's part of the invisibility as well, too, is that when we move and when we try and get power, that's not there. So we want a kind of photography that is more radical, that doesn't patronize us, that actually that is sort of like a tool that we can use for acquiring power of our own. And that takes us, I think, to a really basic question. and that is for photographers, what is our role in this? Are we supposed to be participants in movements for social change? Or are we just out there with a camera to take pictures of them and sort of document them?
I think, David, we have a comment from Aneti who states that she is a photographer. They are a photographer, excuse me. There are lots of photographers finding movements to take pictures of, but none really leading movements as they happen. I just have so many questions, she says, that kind of to your point just now. And then Stephen Pitts, hello. Who a big part is like of this is also who is our audience? Who are we creating this the photography for? And Sochi is saying that, the notions of poverty porn and the prevalence of that still today in our visual imagery.
That's right. I think those are very good observations, all of them. And, we certainly have poverty porn, and we also have war porn, war photography that does the same thing. So at some point, maybe we could have another session, and I have a slideshow about the war in Vietnam, where we could take a look at the war photographs that were shot on the US side and the photographs that were shot on the Vietnamese side. And some of the US photographs were very powerful photographs, and I think helped to end the war. The ones of the little girl running down the road away from her village as the smoke rises up from the napalm there. But they're still very different how people saw themselves, very different from the people who were fighting in that war for the liberation of their country. And so the commitment of people um, to the photograph and to taking these photographs, is it just simply to sort of show the reality of it? I think what we get in the end are photographs that sort of like, first of all, that teach us how powerless we are, and also photographs that are telling us that these are terrible things and they can't really be changed. So if we want change, if we want social change, what do photographers have to do with this? And the first thing I think is that we have to question what the criteria are. If you're a photographer and you work for the New York Times, you are told that you cannot participate in social movements, period. The end. As our union, we fought for the right to be a union there, and we have a union, but that's about it. Photographers or writers get penalized if they march in marches, or if they take sides, and what they produce is supposed to reflect this objectivity, which in the end, I think is really the point of view of the people who own the newspaper. So what is the standard? What is the standard we should have for photographs if we want them to be photographs that help move forward a movement for social justice? And I have a friend, Ringo Hallinan, who used to teach, he died recently, but he taught community journalism at UC Santa Cruz. And Ringo said, instead of talking about objectivity and neutrality, neither of which are, possible anyway, what the criteria we should use is that our photographs should be true and they should be accurate. And what we write should be true and it should be accurate. So, but what does that mean? What is a photograph that is true? We know, especially in the age of AI, photographs can lie. But what does it mean to say a photograph is true? And I think really what it means to me as somebody who does this is a photograph is true if it defends our side. That's a hell of a statement, right? It says that there are sides here and the photographs have to take a side. And if they don't take a side, they are not really true. But again, this is something that I think is up for discussion and debate. And I think that if you have ideas about this, you should say what you think.
We have a hand raised from Peter.
Okay,
Hi.
Peter.
Hey, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Hey, David. Thanks for the presentation. I guess I'm just curious. We live in such a kind of visually saturated society now. I mean, there's just images everywhere. And a lot of the photos that you sort of presented here came from an era when that wasn't necessarily the case. So the image of Che, for example, and the impact it had. And I guess I just wonder what you think about kind of the ability of an image to have an impact in this day and age. I think about, for example, the young baby whose body washed ashore. I think it was in Turkey
Yeah.
during the Syrian civil war. And yes, it had an impact. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about kind of the power of images today versus the 1920s or the 1960s.
Well, I think it has to do with, in some ways, the changing relationship between photographers and the media to begin with. Again, I think about the photograph from the Vietnam War of the young girl running down the road with her village and smoking coming up from it behind her, or the one of the general with his pistol shooting a guerrillero in the street in the middle of Saigon. And both of those photographs played an enormous role, I think, in ending the war because people looked at them and said, no, 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 no. And the photographers who took them and the people who went to Vietnam to do that reporting, I think thought of themselves much more as truth tellers than people in the media do today. I wonder how many people go to Iraq or went to Iraq during the war in Iraq saying that they were going to tell the truth in the same way. And I think so. I think part of it has to do with the changing relationship between photographers and who we work for. That there's no room, or there's much less room for people to do what they did during the war in Vietnam, and so we don't get those photographs because who's out there going to take them? But it also, I think, has to do with how the photographs get used because I'm not so sure that um, I think for a photograph to have power for us means that it has to be useful for us in terms of how we organize for social change, especially deep social change, radical social change. And so really we have to talk about how the photograph gets used, not only who takes it and how they take it and what's a photograph of, but then what happens to it afterwards. And again, Cordo, who took the photograph of Che, he didn't think, I'm sure when he took it, that what was going to happen to it. It was just the circumstances. But it was also the circumstances, part of those circumstances was that Cuba just had a revolution, and the revolution took that photograph and it used it. Um, so now what do our movements, who the person who asked the question about saying you don't see photographers leading social movements, that is a really interesting question, I think. Well, the first thing I would say is, well, why not? Photographers just like anybody else. But also, it is sort of getting at this whole question of what are we going to do with the photographs, and how do we use them? And given that we don't own TV stations and that we don't have newspapers that have circulation in the millions, what is it that we do with the photographs that give them power? And that because I think the way that we use the photographs are also what give them the power. So, and that way, I'm going to try and talk more about that in the last session of this series here. Just talking about my own, you know, circuitous road trying to answer those questions. But I think if you have any answers to those questions, that's a really important one. What does it mean that photographs, because what you're saying, Peter, or what I hear you implied in what you're saying is that, well, a single photograph doesn't have the same power to move us anymore as they did then.
I guess that's what I find myself wondering. Yeah.
Well,
Whether audiences have become calloused um, by by social media and all the rest.
well, yes. I think that's a good one. What do they call it? pity fatigue or something like that.
Mm.
But again, that's still going back to this question of how they're used. Because if what people are seeing is the images and the photographs in a certain context, in the newspaper that tells them what it's about and that has an overall message to it, which I think is a class message always and always has been, which is, things are not going to change beyond a certain point. Maybe we could get rid of Trump, but capitalism is here to stay. And that so the photograph appears to people in that context. So what do we do with the photograph? I mean, you work for American Community Media, so you're not the New York Times. And the whole intention of American Community Media is to make journalism and photographs, writing and photographs, available to media outlets that are not the New York Times, but are I remember Ethnic Media Services that came before, which are the newspapers that serve communities of color in this country primarily. And so I think that means that the photographs can do something different. They're speaking to a different audience. They're speaking to a much more specific audience. And they can be partisan in a way that a photograph for the New York Times cannot, because it won't get the attention. We just did a series on May Day in Santa Maria, right? And those photographs in that article is not a publishable piece in the New York Times because it's too partisan. I know because they closed the door on me a long time ago on the mainstream media saying specifically that it's too partisan, take sides too much.
David, I just want to, there's interesting comments from Xochitl Casal, who's just also wanting to frame a little bit like the differences between narrative photography and journalism photography, but these both have to take sides. They're very in agreement. And also a really interesting point about vernacular photography, which makes such a think about the state of power and impact and how that can take away from photography and art by making everything seem like it's art or making everything feeling that is important because of it. And I don't know, Sachi, if I framed that right, I kind of paraphrased, but I just wanted to make sure that we got those two comments to you too. Sort of these different types of photography and their importance in taking sides, but that there might be other motifs and rationales. Yeah.
Well, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Sochi, I would be really interested to hear it, especially, about the categories, narrative photography and vernacular photography. Narrative photography, I'm a little unsure about what you mean there. Vernacular photography is kind of the elevation of photography that's just taken by ordinary people for ordinary purposes and turning it into art that gets sold in a gallery or whatnot, or published in a book. And I think there's for
Yeah,
vernacular photography.
she's raised or they've raised their hand. And so Sochi, you can unmute at any time.
Yep,
Oh,
I think I'm on. Yeah, so I think from my understanding, in the past, vernacular photography kind of meant that the art of everyday people then being elevated. But I think from what I hear from my art students and people in my classes is that the way vernacular photography is kind of understood now, or at least by these folks, is that product photography has become artistic, has become aesthetic. And so we start to look at images even for Monday things like a watch or a dress, and suddenly it becomes again aesthetic, very intentional lighting, has all of this, so it makes it look like an impactful piece of art. But like David was saying earlier, it's meant to saturate and take the value away from what is art, which and it makes me again think about how fascism particularly tries to devalue art and expression and meaning from these things by turning it into an aesthetic rather than um, a statement or intent, and then leading back to narrative versus narrative photography, where the artist or the photographer has a story, an intentional story to tell behind the image, where the intention is to, juxtapose X and Y versus an image that just might happenstantially been, X and Y, right? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I think that, say, in a way, a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of fits under this this name of narrative photography. At least this is, photography with narrative. You think of those juxtaposed images, and they certainly qualify, especially photographs that exist in the context of words as well, too. And we haven't really even talked about that. But the other thing about vernacular photography is that because we live in capitalism, it's getting commodified, and we're finding books being published that are made up of photographs that were taken, like family pictures that were just taken by people for their family purposes, and that then become commodified, and everything gets commodified. That's what capitalism does. Some of the photographs that we've been looking at, if you had a print of it, you could probably sell it for a couple $1,000s. So that was certainly not the intention of the person that took it, but it is kind of what, is what the rules of capitalism are.
I'm going to jump in real quick, David, just to cover a couple things. First is your time check. We have about 55 minutes left. Second is we do have Brooke Anderson here with us. So later we will have some time available for Brooke to present photos. And then there's so many excellent comments in the chat. I'm afraid I can't catch you up to all of them. But we have a comment from Chris. During the 60s and 70s, the Farm Worker Union very effectively used photos of farm workers on their boycott leaflets. The photos were not run in the big media, but the way the union utilized the photos to convince people to support boycotts had great impact. How and where we distribute is key. And then there was another comment earlier, I think from Jimmy Kelly. It got broken up a little bit into multiple messages, but it says, during the Vietnam War, I lobbied my congressman, and behind his huge desk, he had a photo of an F-1 fighter jet, a color atmospheric explosion, and a shot of him in a tank, a la Michael Dukakis. So apologies to anyone who I missed, but yeah, keep them coming. We're having some great comments here and also hand raising as well. So those are my updates for you, David.
Well, thank you so much for all of that. And I'm going to sort of go into our next part of it and make it run as fast as I can because I want to save the time. So these are images that I took, and I was a union organizer before becoming a photographer. And a lot of what I organized was strikes, basically. And so I wound up at the end of that time when I was doing this work of taking a lot of photographs. And so I wanted to talk about them and show them and sort of make my case for why they're here. So the first series are from a strike that took place in Mountain View in Silicon Valley, the first strike ever of production workers in the Silicon Valley factory. And so these are the strikers, and I was working for the United Electrical Workers at the time. And so I picked up the camera and started taking photographs, and the workers kind of tolerated me. And what was interesting to me were the people themselves, what they did and who they were. And this was the people who worked in this factory were from Mexico and El Salvador. And so I was trying to look at the culture of people as in terms of how they were dressed, for instance, and how they stood. And I just love this one because of the women on the right there and how they are kind of like, it seems powerful to me, the way they were holding themselves. This is also the culture of the union that I was working for, but also the workers themselves, that the first thing that happens is that the workers sit down, they have a meeting on the picket line the first day of the strike, they elect a union committee, and the person who's speaking is Maria Pantoja. And Maria Pantoja is from Mexico, and she was one of the people who were sent to the US by the left-wing parties in Mexico, the PASUN, at the end of the 70s, in order to help Mexican workers organize in the United States and to do political work among them. And so she got a job as an organizer with the UE. And so here she is helping these workers to organize their union committee with the other organizer, the woman, dark glasses there, Anne-Marie Johan. The workers, because they were mostly women and nobody had any money, people brought their families to the picket line. And so a lot of the photographs are about women and children and the children on the picket line. And you can also see that there were no printed picket signs here. People wrote their own, sometimes with the help of people who spoke more English, and sometimes, people wrote their own whatever. But just sort of the love between the women and their kids as they brought them to the line. And this was an education for the kids too. You look at these girls who are holding the signs here, and if you had asked them what they were doing there, they could easily have told you that they were on strike with their parents and that the strike was about for their rights. They knew what for their rights was all about. So this was a politicization of the whole family. And I think, I wonder what, this is a long time ago, but I wonder what happened to those kids. And I keep thinking, they're going to grow up to be the next generation of organizers and activists. So because people came with their culture of social struggle from Mexico and El Salvador, doing things like a planton. We had a planton, an Occupy outside the buildings of their main customer to try and get the customer to stop ordering things from the company while they were on strike. And so here are the workers. This is sort of like people bringing the culture of class struggle from Mexico, especially, into the US and using it here. And again, just looking at who is there. This is a second strike. This is at a place called Cal Spas in Pomona. And the person who's talking is Humberto Camacho. And Humberto Camacho, I think, is the unsung hero of our labor movement, or a unsung hero of our labor movement, because he spent, years and years and years in Los Angeles and in Southern California telling unions and telling the labor movement that undocumented workers were willing to organize and that the unions should understand that and help people to organize and stop looking at them as being job competitors and the enemy. And so this is, and he was the international rep for the UE. And anyway, one of my heroes, clearly. And this is Camacho with the strike committee of a big sweatshop in Pomona called Cal Spas that made hot tubs. And this is the day that the strike started. And so what happened is that the workers organized very quickly. They went to Camacho, said that they wanted to go out and that they wanted to organize. Camacho said, that's fine. And then the head of the union committee got beaten up in front of the plant, at which point the workers said, okay, tomorrow we're just going to come out for lunch and we're not going to go back in. And so this is what happened at lunchtime. And so again, this is sort of like looking at the spirit and the militance of those workers, what language they're speaking, kind of who they are. And again, this is sort of like the picture of the Versatronic strike. This is the union committee reporting to the workers in general about the decisions they're making, in this case about, we didn't have hardly any money, so there was no strike benefits per se, but there was a little bit of funds to help people who were really desperate about to get evicted and so forth. And so the union committee is up there in a park. And again, this is about the culture of people. This is something that people expected to do because it was part of the democratic and working class culture that they were bringing from Mexico and El Salvador, but especially from Mexico in the case of these workers. So the company hired strikebreakers, and I took this picture of the strikebreakers. being recruited at the company office. And what you see, the first thing you see in looking at the strikebreakers is that they look exactly the same as the strikers. The company is hiring out of the barrio in Pomona, workers who are basically unemployed, people who are living close to the line, just like the strikers were, and using that economic desperation to hire people. And so this is something that the workers and the strikers had to deal with. And talking about economic desperation, one of the things I found out as being one of the organizers here was that people really had no food at home. And so, I remember going and visiting somebody and opening the cupboards and there was nothing there. And so the first thing we had to do is we had to set up a strike kitchen. And there is Maria Pantoja again, basically helping workers to organize the strike kitchen. And that's where, sometimes that was the meal that people ate was the meal that we were able to get together at the strike kitchen. And this was on the sidewalk right down the street, down 9th Street from the factory. So in order to keep the company from recruiting strikebreakers, the workers would organize these marches through the barrio in Pomona, basically telling people we're on strike, don't go to work there. And so this is one of those marches. And again, this is, in this one we did have printed signs, but you can see the workers put in their own contributions to it. And so in this strike, what happened is that we tried to go after the customers. We fought the company as hard as we could. But at a certain point, after we'd been out for 5 weeks, we needed to, what we say in unions is called get the clock running, meaning that if you're on strike and the strike is ruled to be a legal strike, an unfair labor practice strike, that the company has to pay you your back wages from the time that you offer to go back to work. And if they don't take you back, pay you your wages for that period of time that follows. And so we decided that we would make an offer to go back to work. But instead of people just doing this individually, we thought, okay, let's have a march and go march down to the plant. We'll all do it together. And so here is Humberto Camacho, and he's standing next to Fabian Nunez. And I won't get into California politics, but Fabian Nunez became Speaker of the Assembly eventually and had a colorful career, as we shall say. Anyway, but at the time he was very supportive of the workers. And so they are heading the march of the workers down to the company to offer to go back to work. And here's what happened. So here's Camacho reading the letter saying, we're going to offer to go back to work. And the racism, to me, you can just see the way in which they won't even look at him, right? It's like we don't even have to recognize that you're even there. So, this is really a lot of these are very charged photographs. And as the photographer, first of all, I want to say that when everything started, of course, they thought this white guy with the camera, and the organizer, and they kind of wondered what that was about. But after the first couple of days, they just got used to it. And this is just David with the camera, and they didn't worry about it anymore. So I was able to take this camera and take pictures in places where I probably would not have been able to get close to. In fact, I'll tell you in a minute about one of them. But here, also, these are very, for me, emotionally charged. I can't really look at this photograph and not feel what I felt as one of the organizer and one of the strikers at the time that it was taken, and the humiliation that the company was trying to enforce on us and how we were not going to take it. So I don't know, it's up to you to say what you think, what you see in it. Here are the workers with their letters saying we're willing to go back to work, waiting them at the company. And finally, the company agreed that they had to take them. And so what they did was we had to line up outside on the sidewalk, outside the parking lot, and one by one go down and make our offer to go back to work. And so here is the head of the union committee, the first one, former Brown Beret, walking down there. And you can see how he's just going to defy the company no matter what humiliation they want to impose on him, marching down there. But in the end, we had to kind of agree that the strike or at least we held a meeting and to talk about ending the strike, and I was the organizer, and so I had to sort of like explain, this is what I think are the realities of the situation, and I don't think that we can keep it going anymore. But you decide it's your strike. And so obviously this is a very emotional issue, and people argued it both ways. And this was just a photograph that I took, of somebody basically crying in this meeting. And, in a way, this is the advantage of being the participant photographer, is that I would never have let anybody else in there with a camera into this meeting because it was such an emotionally charged thing. But I had the camera and I could do it, and so I did. And then these are just other photographs of strikes. This was the Diamond Walnut strike that went on for, gosh, I think it was like 11 years. And these are women who are kind of living outside the big Diamond Walnut plant in Stockton. And just, again, this is a very much of an LA picture. These are strikers who were framers. And, Los Angeles, part of the big immigrant upsurge in Los Angeles was the strike of people who put the drywall on in houses, in house construction. And they organized themselves in 1992. And a lot of them came from the same town, so they all knew each other, at least enough. And they shut down home construction from Santa Barbara to the Mexican border. And they were very, very militant people. And so they would drive in caravans out to the job sites to shut down the job sites. And the highway patrol would stop them. And when they stopped them, then people got out of their cars and they would walk across the freeway and stop the freeway. So it was just a really hairy confrontation. And after they kind of won their strike, then the people who put the frame up in the houses, and these are called the framers, and that's what's on this bus. And the union, the carpenters union, rented buses for people so that they wouldn't be in danger of getting picked up by the migra or by the highway patrol, and would bus them out to the job site. And so this is what would happen when they got there. And that is that the strikers would go into the job site and they will pull the workers out, not by physically, but by convincing them. And so this is, how do you want to put it? They are trespassing for sure, right? This is, the foremen are going crazy. They're going to call the cops. And the workers are saying, hey, we're on strike here. We're going to do what we're doing. And so this to me is sort of a mini defiance of capitalism, because the rule of capitalism is that private property is sacred. And it trumps private property rights, trump everything, including the right to go on strike and the right to do anything else. And the workers here are saying, we don't care about private property rights. We are going to make our strike effective, and we are going to climb onto that side and go this workers off. And so to me, this is a sort of a revolutionary photograph because of what it is saying about property relations in capitalism. And then finally, a few photographs from the Farm Workers Union. This is a strike in the Salinas Valley. And again, this is the confrontation. Yes, it's the sheriff is protecting the property of the grower from the strikers who are out there with their bullhorn calling people to come out of the fields. But of course, they did more than just stand there at the edge of the field. And that is, in this photograph, we see the two union organizers coming up to a broccoli machine and talking to the women on the broccoli machine and essentially saying, get off the machine, come join us, be part of the strike. And, and they're doing this on the grower's property. And eventually, of course, the sheriffs did get there and arrested people. But it is part of the, how do you want to put it? It's the kind of class consciousness that many people learn in Mexico because of the culture that they grow up in, that says that workers' rights are on an equal level with the rights of the owners, and that we have the right to go on strike, and we have the right to make our strike effective. So even though they knew that they would get arrested, to them, going on to the property and pulling out the workers was just what had to be done. And then that's it for the photographs here. So here we are. We've got time, and great. So before we get to Brooke here, I wanted to say a couple of things about strike photographs. And kind of why I put them in here and why I think they belong. And that is because of the nature of strikes themselves. Not all strikes clearly, but when workers go out on strike, what they're doing, whether they are always aware of it or not, and whether they do it effectively or not, people are contesting for power clearly with the people that they're striking against. The nature of strike is saying, I am not going to go to work until you agree. And if you try to eliminate me, I'm going to try and stop you from doing that. So it is workers who are challenging the system. And of course, all that we hear from, and all you have to do is open the LA Times and read the next article about a strike. And what you're going to read mostly is the statements of the people who are being struck against management saying, well, we think our position is reasonable and we offer these people a lot of money. And, besides, they don't have any right to do this. And all of the bullshit stuff that you hear from people who are on the other side of this class divide, who are defending essentially their ability to keep that system running for their benefit. So a strike is about this clash of classes, really. And it's not the only kind of clash of classes that happens in capitalism, but it's one that very often is a real clear one. And because of that, as an organizer, when I was a union organizer, to me, I always thought, that these are times when people learn the reality of the world that we live in. Those sheriffs who were standing there protecting the field against the strikers, whose side are the sheriff on? They're not on the side of the strikers protecting them against whatever grower violence they might face. They are protecting the existing order. So workers learn this. And that's very important. If you want to change the world, people have to understand what the basic rule is. And again, the basic rule of capitalism is that private property rights trump workers' rights. And so I think strike photographs, if they're skillful ones, they can dramatize this over and over again. So again, we get back to the place of, okay, that's fine. You took the photograph, it shows this, then what? What use is it? Is it really going to help us to win here? Is it going to make us any more powerful? And that all has to do with how the photograph gets used and what the relationship is between the photographer or the artist and what's out there in front of the camera. And when I was able to function as both the union organizer and the photographer at Cal Spas and at Versatronics, that was in a way, I felt very privileged because I could carry that camera into a situation where nobody else would be able to do it because people trusted me because I had this other function. I was the organizer and we learned very quickly that we could trust each other. But then, still, I think that I had this idea at the beginning of the CalSPA strike. I'm going to document this from the beginning to the end. I'm going to really tell the story of the strike. And at the end of it, what I did with it was I found this alternative newspaper in West LA that was called the LA Village View. It was like the LA Weekly, only smaller. And it was run by this guy who was sort of a progressive guy. And I wrote up the story and I took the pictures and I showed it to him and he said, oh yeah, let's do it. And so we put on the front page of the LA Village View this photograph of the other woman. Gosh, I should have pointed her out in the picture. This other photograph of the other organizer who was out there, and that was a woman named Ana Martinez. And Ana Martinez had been a trade unionist in El Salvador. She had worked in the Texas Instrument plant in Ilopango. And when the general strike in El Salvador came, that was the beginning of the Civil War in 1979, they organized a walkout in their factory along with workers doing that elsewhere. And of course, the military came down and they shot up the strikers and they went down to the union office and shot up the union office. And so people died. And Ana eventually fled from El Salvador and she came to Los Angeles and worked as a domestic worker. And then somehow she found Camacho, or Camacho found her, and she became an organizer for the UE, which is where she was on that picket line. And Anna was a disciplinarian. When she organized the picket line at Cal Spas, she was really hard. If you were a worker and you didn't show up for your picket shift, you were going to hear it, because for her, her experience was that, if you mess up, people could die. So we are going to run this in a disciplined way, and that's the way it's going to be. And she was a remarkable person, and so we put her on the front page of the Village View. And it was at the end of the strike, really, and so it didn't help us to win the strike. But I think what it did was it helped to give a sense of reality to people who were very far away from Pomona, of this upsurge. It was a little part of the working class upsurge of immigrant Latino workers in Los Angeles that wound up changing LA. So that's kind of my rationale for having taken these photographs and what the idea was that we would do with them. So again, I want to sort of open the floor briefly and then invite Brooke to present her work for us. So if there are people who have comments or questions so far, and you want, please come forward. Do we have anything in the chat there?
A lot of them are kudos, beautiful, inspiring session, wonderful images. Sometimes the power lies not in a single image, but in a series of images. That's from Stephen Pitts. Also, Peter giving you kudos here. Yes, let's see if I'm missing anything. But yeah, please unmute, folks, if you'd like to ask David a question or have a comment or would like to any clarifications. Thank you, David. And
well, I tell you what, Brooke, if you're ready, I'm going to unshare the screen here. And if you're ready to go here, why don't we move over to you?
Sure. Hi, all. It's so good to be with you. David, thank you so much. And UCLA, thank you so much for offering this.
Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't say anything about who you are.
Okay.
So Brooke is the movement photographer of Northern California. So anytime you go to any kind of movement action, Brooke is there with the camera, and she has been doing this for a long time and is a very, very skillful photographer, and comes out of the labor and rights movements of our area. So she was an organizer before becoming a photographer, and I think that her work shows that, that whole sense of commitment to it, that it's not just neutral work. But at any rate, a really skillful, wonderful photographer. And thank you so much for being willing to show us your work, Brooke.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the invitation to do so. I can't wait to see other people's work. I think that's the fun part of being in community with other revolutionary movement photographers. Somebody's asking, do I have an IG? I do. I'll figure out how to put it in the chat in a second, but it's movement photographer, like social movement photographer is my IG. But yeah, just so grateful. I came up as a union organizer like David. He's been my mentor for a good 2 decades. I was a hotel worker organizer, never took a photography class, mostly just put my camera in David's face and said, what do these buttons do? And tried to learn it, and grateful to be in community with other folks here like Stephen Pitts and whatnot. So anyway, I think to get to the question, I'll start just while I'm starting to figure out how to share my screen of the what is a revolutionary photographer? So much for me of what that means is that we're taking photos that both ask people through their visual imagery, like which side are you on and what are you willing to do? Um, and so, we talked a little bit about the Vietnam War and the impact of photos on that. And so I wanted to share, let's see if I can share my screen, some photos that I think actually similarly speak to this question of what do we do when our government is complicit. or funding or citing with death. And so, oops, there we go. So I wanted to share just a couple quick photos from an action that took place in 2024. This was after we'd already seen tens and tens of thousands of folks in the street calling for an end to genocide in Palestine. In the long labor tradition of ILWU, the International Longshore and Warehouse Workers Union, that sided with workers in South Africa, responded to the call of Black workers in South Africa who are trying to stop apartheid in South Africa. Those union workers refused to unload apartheid South African cargo at the Port of Oakland. Similarly, there has been in that tradition, a long tradition of ILWU longshore workers here working with Palestinian activists to try to figure out how to block cargo, military shipments in particular, from going to Israel. And so this is a photo that I took as protesters gathered outside of an arms shipment, weapons shipment that was showing up at the Port of Oakland. And, folks had been there and rallying for hours and hours. And then I am fascinated in particular by this moment where someone decides that they're going to try to take direct action. And so this is a photo of a young man who decided to jump the fence, which led activists to run to the shipments and actually literally try to take the mooring lines, the ropes holding those shipments back, and tie them around their bodies and try to figure out how to hold the ship from leaving the port with weapons. You see activists who then climbed onto the ship and were trying to stop that ship from being able to pull away from the shore. And of course, you see the police arrive at some point, and arrests start to take place. And then similarly, a similar action that happened on the Bay Bridge during the APEC conference in particular. I think this was when President Biden was going to be in town to stop traffic on the Bay Bridge to call attention to what was happening in Palestine. And so you see activists who drove their cars onto the Bay Bridge, stopped their cars on the Bay Bridge, used lock boxes and chains to sort of tie themselves to those cars, and police cutting through those lock boxes and chains as activists are making their case. And California Highway Patrol coming in pretty significant numbers and activists squaring off against California Highway Patrol. And so I shared these images and happy to take some questions. But, I think for me, really similar to what David said as a union organizer, that you have trust within the movement. There are photos that you're going to be able to get that other folks aren't going to be able to get. And I say that not from a place of competition about a photographer, but the importance of being trusted within the movement to take those photos such that folks give you a heads up. We are going to being on the Bay Bridge this day. We are going out to the port so that you can get some of those early photos that show those moments where people sort of where you're breaking the membrane between folks being like, we're asking for something to stop versus we are going to take necessary action to try to stop, for instance, weapons shipments. And so I think those are those really fascinating moments that I think for me is what being a revolutionary photographer is about, is this question literally that you can see in this photo of like, which side are you on and what would you be willing to do? And how do we build trust with each other to be able to take bigger risks, whether those risks are to risk firing, to join a union, whether those risks are to put our bodies between ourselves and our immigrant neighbors who are being arrested or abducted by ICE, whether that's about weapons shipments, et cetera. But that's really what I hope to do with these photos. So I want to be brief, but happy to take some questions. And I can't really see the chat when I'm sharing my screen. So let me know if there's a photo I should go back to or if I should stop sharing my screen and if there's any questions.
Thank you, Brooke. This is Yana. We do have a question from Fabian saying and asking, I'm curious how you create trust with organizers to know when these actions will take place and how has that been built? Yeah.
Oh, that's such a great question, Fabian. Thank you. I mean, part of it is I've been in the Bay for 2 decades and been out at, a gazillion actions over that time. I also go to some of the organizing meetings for these actions. So even though I consider myself a photojournalist and believe in the craft and publish my work, I do not carry the same beliefs that we need to be uninvolved to be able to be truthful about our stories. And so I think I've built a lot of trust with folks. When people have given me a heads up, I then don't call the cops. I don't call the press. I show up, I take those photos, I make those photos available to the movement. Often what I've done once there's been Wi-Fi on my camera is go take these quick photos. They're happening on the bridge before these arrests get made, and then make those photos available to the organizers to put into a Google Drive that then, they can be putting out to folks so that if the arrests happen before mainstream media get there, then we've at least got the photos. And I'm sorry, I'm seeing Stephen asking that photo that shows a standoff. Do you use a zoom lens or were you that close? Stephen, which one are you thinking of? On the boat or on the Bay Bridge?
I think it's the one that's on the Bay Bridge here. That's the one I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think my guess is that I probably had a 24 to 70 and a 70 to 200, two different lenses. This wide angle one, I actually really was this close. And I do think that this is the interesting question of like the goal is to get the photos, but I'm also trying to never get arrested. Not that I haven't been arrested. I've been arrested. I've been hit. There've been consequences for taking these photos. But if you get arrested, you might not get to keep your SD cards. You might be in jail and your photos go nowhere for a while. I'm so grateful for the union I belong to. I'm part of CWA Pacific Media Workers Guild, Local 39521 with David. We've been helping to build the freelance unit of that. And one of the things that we did was pass a bill that makes it possible for photographers and journalists, but like broadly defined, to stay when police have called a kettle so long as you're not interfering. And obviously, police are going to then overstep that and push, try to push you away, but it does give you some negotiating power to still stay when those arrests are happening. Is it okay if I just keep reading these questions? What are the ways you do protect yourself in those situations? Yeah, I do choose to wear a press pass. It's a press pass that my union um, provides for folks who are doing this work. I choose to get that press pass. I choose not to get a press pass from the city or from the police because I don't want them to decide who's a legitimate journalist or not. I do carry in my backpack goggles, a mask, water to flush my eyes, decontaminant wipes, hearing protection. And it's real that PPE, that like those physical protection things only do so much. The main thing you can do to protect yourself is build with other photographers and build with the movement. Because those are the photographers, they're going to tell you, hey, I know you got your eye through a viewfinder right now, but the police are coming from the left. That's David Bacon the morning after I got hit by police, like organizing my union to write letters to the city mayor and chief of police when I got arrested. So I think our greatest protection is like situational awareness when you're out there and building with other photographers. I will share in the chat at some point I did just write a piece for Prism Media about how photographers can protect themselves while documenting ICE abductions of our neighborhoods. Um, other do do do. Any other questions? Can stop sharing.
We do have a question in the Q&A. I don't think it's been read out loud yet, but stop me if this is a repeat. One attendee says, I'm interested in how white photographers who document cultures outside their own think about this work. Specifically, how do you justify taking on the role versus creating space for other photographers? If you believe your perspective adds weight and trust that insiders can't provide, what is that value and why does it matter? And are there communities or subjects where you think that this work shouldn't be done by outsiders?
Ooh, those are such all incredibly valid, great, juicy questions. Probably more than I can answer, and I think that's a probably no one definitive answer, and certainly not mine, and certainly more like a line of inquiry. I do think that our role as, or I see my role as a white photographer is also to be building with photographers and thinking about the community that I'm photographing. Is there somebody else that would make more sense to photograph this? So I get requests sometimes to come to something, and I think first, is there a photographer that's already local? Is there a photographer that's already part of that community? And that part of my role can be connecting that community to a photographer that's actually already in that community and lifting the work up of those photographers. And there's cases in which it's really helpful to actually have 4 or 5 photographers out there, and we've rolled with a crew of photographers who come from all kinds of communities and have been building with each other, and that it's great to have multiple cameras there. Yeah, so I think it's mostly I would put forward it's mostly about building those relationships and trying to be humble that yeah, you might not always be the right photographer for it. I'm seeing has ice made it more difficult to roam freely and photograph? Um, for me in the Bay, and sorry, I also don't need to take all of these other participants. Probably have lots to share on this, and David would too. I haven't experienced that in the Bay so much on a day-to-day basis. Both David and I were present for a folks trying to. Let me see if I can actually share my screen again to show a photo but folks trying to actually stop ICE from coming into our community. And yeah, it was a pretty significant pushback specifically from Customs and Border Patrol that like sprayed pepper spray right in the face of a pastor, Pastor Jorge Bautista, that was standing between immigrant communities and folks. Now I think you can share this, you can see the screen, but this is Pastor Reverend maybe Jorge Bautista, and these are folks in the background who are walking back and forth in a really peaceful protest in front of where ICE and Customs and Border Patrol was going to stage to carry out enforcement actions in the Bay Area. And this shot was taken, half of a second before Pastor Jorge was shot with this pepper ball that then David's got some great photos of him both being shot and folks cleaning the pepper spray out of his eyes. Yeah. Oh, David, I think you're on mute still, actually. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. My connection cut out for a little while, so I had to come back on. So again, thanks for showing us the images and talking about them, and hopefully inspiring people because starting next time for the next 2 sessions, it would be great if people would actually come with some of your own images to show us and to talk about them. So if you're a photographer, next time we'll set it up so that you can have 5 minutes and show us 3 images, 4 images, 5 images, not more than 5, and talk about them. And you can talk about them in any way that you like, what they're photographs of, why you took them, what the importance is. Also, for people who are not photographers, if there is a particular image that you think belongs in this discussion, that's a revolutionary photograph or one that you think really is important for us to analyze and figure out what it, why we should talk about it. Bring that, and you can have a couple of minutes to present that photograph and to talk about it. And of course, hopefully we'll get some response from people who are also participating and we can all participate in that discussion. So again, next time, please bring yours. And Emily, I'm not sure if we want to give people a way of uploading them beforehand, in case people want to do that. Although if you want to just simply show up and share a screen, that's cool too. But
David, yes, there is. We have a Google form that Simone put into the chat. So if you have photographs that you'd like to share for next Thursday, same time, same place, we will try to curate some of those and we'll have then the beginning so that we all don't sort of struggle with a screen. But if you do come with one or two, just let us know at the beginning of the session. But this the Google form is there for you to submit, and please add your name and if you have any kind of caption you'd like. And I did hear from folks, David, they would love to have the list of photographers who you cited in your first section of the, so we'll work with you on that. But yeah, that would be the best way to do it. And I don't know if Emily or Maisha or Simone have any other sort of instructions, but please add to the Google form. Yeah.
Nope, you got it. That's everything. So we'll take submissions through that Google form. I think we'll save a little bit of time for, spontaneous day of if you aren't able to submit your photos in advance. We'll still have room in the moment if you can just bring them to the Zoom workshop. And I'll also send out that Google form via email to all attendees. So you'll have another way to get it if you aren't able to copy it from the webinar chat.
Great. And there are a couple of other questions here. What is the name of the Photographers Union? It is called Guild Freelancers. So if you want to look up the webpage for Guild Freelancers, it's just look up guildfreelancers.org. And it is a unit of the Pacific Media Workers Guild, which is the Northern California local of the newspaper. We used to be called the Newspaper Guild, and now we're called the Media Guild, Media Workers Guild. But in any event, it is the freelance unit of it. And the webpage can show you how to join if you're interested in joining. And then there is another question I thought that we had here about recording, whether recording will be shared, and I don't know about that one.
Yes, we can share a recording with participants. And I think Richard asked, is that only on the West Coast, maybe in reference to the union?
You mean the union? Only on the West Coast?
Yeah, the guild is it only for West Coast or is representation on
No,
the East
actually,
Coast?
if you're a freelancer anywhere, you can join Guild Freelancers. Our local union covers Northern California because we have contracts with papers and media located in Northern California, but the freelance unit covers everything. So if you're working as a freelancer in some other state or some other area, you can join Guild Freelancers for sure. Okay. Well, then I think that oh, if you're based in New York City, yep, you're welcome. You're welcome for sure. I think that's it. So until next week, next Thursday, 4 o'clock, it's been a real experience doing this and pleasure talking with you. And I look forward to hearing more from you next time.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you everyone for attending.
See you all next week. Join us. Beautiful questions, and thank you to our communications team at UCLA. I really want to give a shout out to Emily, Joe, Maisha, and Simone, who have been, there's always folks on the back end doing all the work, and beautiful. Thank you, David, and Brooke for sharing with us today.
Well, thank you for all for being here, and see you next week.